So I typically see chocolate covered strawberries made one of 3 ways, and that's largely dictated by the type of chocolate that you use. And the technique I'm gonna be showing you today is my favorite for home bakers because it's pretty straightforward. It doesn't require any thermometers or tempering, and the results are pretty fantastic. And that's why it's really the only chocolate covered strawberry technique that I use now.
Okay, here I've made a chart that shows the differences between cost and difficulty and texture between those 3 techniques. The first method uses entirely real chocolate, the second uses compound chocolate, and the third uses a combination of both real and compound. So first let's go over strawberries dipped entirely in real chocolate. And lots of bakers ask, how do you know what's real chocolate? So by definition, real chocolate has to have 2 ingredients: cocoa solids, sometimes labeled as cocoa mass or cocoa liqueur, and cocoa butter. And this type of chocolate usually comes in bars or little discs called Calais. Some brands you might be familiar with are Ghirardelli, Lindt, Valrhona. Overall, this is the most expensive type of chocolate to use. And because it has cocoa butter, that requires tempering or using controlled temperatures to allow the chocolate to set properly. And that can be intimidating, so I've rated this the most difficult out of the 3. It's got the best, most authentic chocolate flavor though. So here's a strawberry dipped in Calabao. You can see a shiny finish. It's got that crispy, crackly texture when you bite into it. Quick note here on chocolate chips. Yes, some type of chocolate chips are considered real chocolate, but I don't like using them because they're engineered to maintain that chip shape while baking. So what companies do is they often alter the fat content of these chocolate chips, and that's gonna mess with the fluidity when it's melted. So note that if you do want to use chocolate chips, you totally can. It's gonna have a different fluidity, which makes it a little bit more difficult to work with. So the next are strawberries dipped entirely with compound, or what's called candy coating chocolate. And these are not considered real chocolate because they don't contain cocoa butter. They usually use some sort of vegetable fat instead. So these are your Wilton's, Candy Melts, and others. And they're relatively inexpensive. And so because it contains no cocoa butter, we don't have to temper it. You just melt it and then kind of stir it and then use it. Really, it's the easiest of all these 3 to work with. As for the flavor, some people like it. In particular, kids don't really mind it, but some may find it's a little artificial tasting. Dries super rock hard. So I guess if you needed something very durable, it's kind of matte on the outside and it doesn't crack. It's got this kind of dull feeling when you bite into it and almost a little bit chalky. Now this third one is my favorite and the one I'm going to be showing you today, and that's to use a combination of real chocolate with a little bit of compound chocolate, and that makes it mid-range in price. So full credit for this idea goes to the channel Pipe It here on YouTube. If you're into chocolate covered strawberries, you need to give this guy a follow. He makes the most beautiful strawberries, lots of creative decorating techniques, far more advanced than what I'm showing you today. So the reason why I like it doesn't require any thermometers or proper tempering, yet it has that great flavor you'd get from using entirely real chocolate. Also, because we're disrupting the cocoa butter crystallization, and I'll get into that in a bit, it doesn't create that crackly coating that falls off of the berry when you bite into it, but rather a chocolate coating with a softer texture. It's still firm and dry, but the coating is almost like the outside of a candy bar, which I absolutely love. Okay, I'm going to show you how to dip these strawberries using the combination chocolate method. And the first thing we need to do is wash the strawberries. So I use cold water, wash them 3 times, and then after that, I let them sit in a cold water bath with just a splash of vinegar. So the science behind vinegar washes for fruits and vegetables is a little bit mixed. Some say that it's very effective. Others say that just rinsing in cold water 3 times very thoroughly and draining in between each step is just as effective. So after all that, I dry the strawberries with a paper towel and then let them air dry completely. Okay, let me show you everything I will be using today. I will be making both milk and dark chocolate covered strawberries, so I will need real and compound chocolates in both those flavors. I will also be decorating with sprinkles today. It's a pretty beginner friendly way to make your chocolate covered strawberries look really fancy. For supplies, I'll need a flat tray lined with some sort of nonstick paper and then a container to melt chocolate. Now this is a BPA-free microwave-safe deli container. You typically want to use plastic to melt chocolate, as glass or ceramic will retain heat and that can make melting inconsistent. I'll also need a silicone or plastic spatula for stirring, and optional tools are like forceps for sprinkle placement and a thermometer. Oh, and you'll also need toothpicks. I also like to have all of my decorations out because you have to put the sprinkles on while the chocolate is still wet, so have everything ready. And the last thing I do before melting the chocolate is putting toothpicks in the ends of the strawberries. Try not to use just the leaves to dip the strawberries. They're often brittle and fragile and can't support the weight of a strawberry, particularly if you have big ones like mine. So you can either use 2 toothpicks, which allows you a little bit more leverage when dipping the chocolate, or a super long skewer. Okay, now we have to melt the chocolate, and you can use this protocol for any type of chocolate. I'm going to show it using dark chocolate, but if you use bar chocolate, which I did with milk chocolate, you're going to want to chop that up into little pieces like this. So Pipe It, that YouTube channel that I was talking about before, likes to use a 50-50 mix of chocolates, but I prefer to use a 75-25 mix. For 8 ounces total, I'm going to use 6 ounces, that's a 75%, of real chocolate and 2 ounces of compound chocolate. That 8 ounces of chocolate is plenty to dip at least 12 large strawberries. Okay, do you see this white film on my compound chocolate? This is called fat bloom. There's also sugar bloom, which has a grainy appearance. Particularly with compound chocolate, I found this has no effect on how the chocolate looks when it sets, so I'm gonna use it. Okay, here is my melting protocol, which you can do for any type of chocolate like milk or white or dark like I'm doing here. On the left, you'll see I will track the number of times and the length of the heating I place the chocolate in the microwave, so I want you to pay attention to the texture of the chocolate. For the first minute, I heat on 20-second intervals, stirring between each step. Then I start decreasing the time, and you'll want to stop heating when about 90% or so of the chocolate is melted, but you can see some solid pieces. For me, this took around 1 minute and 20 seconds. Then you'll need to stir until all the chocolate is melted, which can take about 1 to 2 minutes. And I found that this technique does not require a thermometer or precise heating temperatures, and I think this is the case because of the compound chocolate, which contains alternate types of fat that have no problem solidifying even if you don't temper it. So what's happening is these fats are disrupting the crystal structure of cocoa butter contained in the real chocolate. And that cocoa butter is responsible for that snappy, crisp texture of tempered chocolate. So disrupting that architecture is likely why this chocolate still sets, but has a softer texture. Now, the one thing I will suggest is that you still check that the chocolate sets by dipping a knife in the melted chocolate. Usually what I do is then I put the knife in the fridge for about 1 minute, take it out, and then kind of touch it. It should be nice and firm, yet a little bit soft. Here you can see the texture or the fluidity of my dark chocolate. For milk chocolate and white chocolate, it's going to be slightly thicker. And anytime during this process when you're dipping strawberries and it's a little bit thicker than this, you can just pop it back in the microwave for a few seconds, stir it really vigorously to make sure that it's thin enough for dipping. Okay, to dip a strawberry, you're going to take the strawberry by the toothpick, pull down all of the leaves and hold it so that you're holding the toothpick as well as the leaves. Then tap your chocolate on the counter to get rid of any air bubbles. I like to turn my container kind of to the side, and then I just push the strawberry into the chocolate, pulling up so that you get the top of the strawberry. I like to get chocolate all the way as close to the leaves as possible. Then pull the strawberry straight up. I like to jiggle it a little bit to make sure any residual chocolate will fall off. Turn it to the side, do the same thing, and then scrape the strawberry on the side of the container. If you don't do this, what you end up getting is kind of a foot or a pile of chocolate that kind of collects underneath the strawberry. So when you scrape it, that's the side that you're going to put down onto the paper. Now, this is also why I like to have strawberries on the toothpick, because I like to decorate them while I'm still holding them. So I'll move the strawberry over to my sprinkle tray and then place my sprinkles on the strawberry, and that allows me to get all sides of the strawberry and get kind of an even distribution. Once it's all decorated, then you want to place it onto your lined tray where you scraped the chocolate off. Alternatively, if you wanted to get really fancy, you could use tweezers to individually place the sprinkles like I'm doing on this milk chocolate strawberry in these heart sprinkles. It does take a little bit more time, and you kind of have to work a little bit quickly because this has to be all done before the chocolate sets. Also did some strawberries using ruby chocolate, which I had never tasted before researching this video. These I made using tempered chocolate, which I feel is a video for another time because there's a bit of background science I'd want to get into. So I'm showing this more because I think it's a cool type of chocolate. It's known as the 4th type of chocolate. So there's dark, milk, white, and now ruby, which is this color because of a specific cacao pod that's this color. And it tastes like white chocolate with a fruity flavor at the end, maybe like a raspberry or strawberry. So it pairs really well with fresh strawberries. I did use my method in this video to make some test strawberries, not shown here, using white compound chocolate since there's no ruby compound chocolate. So I suggest that if you want to use this type of chocolate, that's what you should do. Okay, inevitably, you'll always be left with some leftover chocolate when dipping strawberries. How do you deal with that? So usually at the end of the process, the chocolate is a little bit hard, so I pop it in the microwave for a few seconds, stir it up till it's nice and fluid. If I want to keep the chocolate for later, I pour it on some plastic wrap, then fold it up and let it harden. I can then break it up into little pieces and use in cookies. Here, I used it in some blondies for my children's lunch boxes. Another thing I like to do is make chocolate bark, so I'll pour it onto some parchment paper, smooth it out, and then add toppings. So for this dark chocolate, I added freeze-dried strawberries, some chopped almonds, a little bit of flaked sea salt, and for this ruby chocolate, more freeze-dried strawberries and some sprinkles.